Well, welcome to my interview with Dr. Eric Jensen.
Our brain is an adaptive organ or mechanism that responds to the environment. So if you provide young children with positive affirmations, with quality parenting, with stability, with things such as quality medical care and on and on and on, you end up getting kids that show up at school and they're usually at grade level and they can do pretty well. But as soon as you start adding what we call adverse risk factors like, for example, lack of quality medical care or chronic stress or not getting cognitive skills taught at home that transfer well to schools. As soon as you get those, then kids who grow up in poverty have a greater likelihood of struggling in school. Now, just because students come from poverty, it doesn't mean they will. It's just a probability. So every teacher needs to know every student individually, like this is how this student is, and make no group assumptions like if you're of this color, if you're this socioeconomic status, that means blah, blah, blah. No, it doesn't. What it means is you've got a greater likelihood that you might see this happening in your classroom.
So, can you give us an example of, a teacher, what they can do, an activity that they can do with the children to help overcome some of the negative impacts?
Well, lots of things come to mind, and I think for many teachers, the difficulty for them is what's really going on is hidden, it's disguised. So I'll share one with you, and then we'll do another one a little bit later on. The first one I want to share with you is that many times students will act out in the classroom. A teacher says one little thing and it just triggers like a crazy, upset, angry behavior. And some teachers just go, whoa, get this kid out of my classroom. When in fact the student has a stress disorder and the teacher had no clue what was going on at home or didn't suspect that. Another thing that might go on would be something cognitively, where if you asked me what would be the 5 greatest indicators of student success in school, starting, let's say, at age 5, most teachers couldn't predict them. If you said, would it be IQ? Some would say yes. If you said reading scores or math scores, some would say yes. But none of those are as high a predictor as one we'll get to in a few minutes. And that's why it's important for teachers to at least start with some awareness so they know what they're doing at their job. When XYZ happens for a behavior, it might be chronic stress is the real issue, and they can mitigate that with how they teach and teaching students self-regulation skills. Or academic challenges, one of the biggest ones is when they don't even know, and what it looks like, sounds like to them in the classroom is something totally different than what it really is.
So what you're saying is that if you give your students A, B, and C to work on a sequence, and Mary hears you and does A, but then sits there and does not complete B and C, it's not because she's being difficult, she just perhaps doesn't remember or doesn't know how to do B and C.
Yeah, I think a good way to understand students is to be someone that asks more questions and assumes less. And part of what we're after is building equity into the education process. So equity for this student might be to have a conversation with her about her and ask questions like, I love how you jumped in and got A done. Tell me what happened. Instead of assuming, just ask them to tell you what happened. It could be that she didn't remember it. It could be that her mind flipped to what's going on at home, and maybe bad things are happening at home. It could be that she started feeling a lot of stress and didn't know how to deal with that, and on and on and on, but you won't know unless you ask. And a teacher who says, yeah, but I can't be asking everyone. I say the first step is to know just ahead of time that there are probabilities that if students come from poverty that chronic stress may be a bigger issue than you think it is.
Right. So what you're saying, because teachers always want to fix things, the first thing that they can do is jump in and ask questions.
Absolutely.
Get to know their students, get to know what makes them tick, and maybe a little bit of what's going on at home. But then my question to you is, teachers are so busy, their plate is so full. How do they, and they have lesson plans to follow, they have parent conferences, teacher meetings, and now you're saying that you want them to take a break and really ask the children some questions and get to know them. How do you address that when teachers say, I don't have time?
I think a big myth about teaching is that we don't have enough time to do our jobs, but for a living, I study high-performing teachers. I mean, these are teachers that consistently get 1.5 to 2 to even 2.5 years of gains for every year they teach. And when I watch them, when I listen to interviews with them, you see the same routines that they follow over and over. They invest heavily up front with their students, meaning more activities to get to know them. They build more of a class culture. They foster better cognitive skills at the beginning so that while it looks like they're falling behind, they're actually building velocity for their class. So once they're up and running, their class just starts roaring. And I think many teachers get caught up into, I have to do this, and this. But nothing matters in the classroom until the students feel like you care. Nothing matters in the classroom until students say, I belong in school. I belong in an academic community. Nothing matters until they say, I feel like I can succeed in this classroom. And nothing matters to kids until they feel like, when I work harder, good things happen. I mean, all of those are things that get set up by really high-performing teachers in those first 5 or 10 days, and many teachers never get those set up, and they struggle a lot. But we know enough, not everything, and I sure don't, but we know enough to know certain things do need to happen right up front. And when you invest wisely up front, then you start freeing up your time. An example, most teachers say, I spend so much time reteaching, I don't have any time. And I said, what if I could cut your reteaching time in half? Would you be interested? And they're like, yeah, but you can't. The kids, they don't remember things. But you can make this tweak and they'll remember more. This one, and they can retrieve more. And this one, and they'll care about it more and remember more. So there's really a lot that can be done.
And why now? Why is this something that's so important for the schools now? I think you talked about that a little bit, but can you expand upon it a little bit?
I think on a macro level, what we're seeing in our society is that the middle class is getting smaller and smaller. And we're seeing that there's greater numbers in the upper class population and greater numbers in lower class population. So anyone who thinks that this is just a quick passing trend is not looking hard at the research. So we see increasing amounts of poverty, we see increasing amounts of stressors for children, and we see increasing numbers in schools of kids who grow up in poverty. So that's sort of the macro picture. When I designed this program, I said, how do we go after that big problem and hone it down to what you do every day at your job? For example, I said, what are 3 things that if you knew about them in the classroom, that your job would be easier as a classroom teacher and you'd be way more effective? Then I started to go after some of the myths. Like an example of a myth is that some kids are just lazy. No, they're not. Infants, a week old, appear to be lazy, but guess what? Effort's teachable. Some kids just have a bad attitude. Actually, attitude can be taught, and I show you how to do that. Or another example is, some kids just don't seem very smart. Well, actually, cognitive capacity can be taught. You know, Einstein's famous for struggling through his first 8 years in school. So clearly, intelligence and clearly so-called smarts are teachable. So those are the kinds of things that have to get dispelled before teachers will say, okay, I'm listening. You know, what else can I do differently? And before the program's finished, not only have we gone through how do you do this, how do you build effort, how do you build cognitive capacity, but Then we work our way up to the school level. How does the school become more effective from the big picture point of view? And how do we get more effectively from a personal point of view?
There are those that would say that poverty is a cultural thing. We've always had it and we always will.
I think one myth about poverty is that there's a certain culture that is common, almost like there's a club and everybody who is poor is in this club, but it's not true. Actually, poverty comes in all different shapes and colors and intensities. So if I introduced you to a friend of mine and I said, hey, I want you to meet my friend, by the way, he's middle class. Like, what does it tell you about them? It doesn't tell you a thing. But if somebody said, let me introduce a friend of mine, he or she is poor, suddenly people bring up all these stereotypes about poverty, most of which are false. Poverty is about more than what's in somebody's bank account. Somebody could be poor and be kind, loving, have moderate levels of stress, and end up sending their kids off to college. And that happens. What could also happen is middle-class families and upper-class families could suffer from plenty of stress coming in for different reasons. There may be drug abuse in the family, violence. There could be parents that divorce. The bottom line is that knowing that a student comes from poverty only gives you some likelihoods and probabilities. And I'll keep bringing this back to know your students individually. So what poverty means to me is, whenever I hear it, it means we have to foster equity, which is a way of saying, how do we help this student succeed? That's what we have to go after. Poverty can be a disadvantage, but we have to say the solution for it is equity. And that's what the online program I've developed does, is it shows you how do you foster equity in every part of their school experience.
You've seen this at work in schools, teachers using equity. What makes the difference? What are they doing that makes the difference between, say, a child that comes from an impoverished family and one that comes from a middle-class family?
Couple of quick examples. One school in San Diego that is a public school, 100% of the students come from poverty. So it's a combined middle and high school. So every student that comes to the school is from poverty. So how do they help students get to the top? The school's mission is to be the school that helps every student who attends be the first one in family history to go to college. So that's the school mission. So I don't believe college is for everybody, but that's this particular school mission. So how do they foster equity? Here are two quick examples. Number one, every student stays after school for about 55 minutes to get homework done on campus. Why? Because the school has created a relationship with a nearby university so that when kids stay after, they get the academic support that they might not get at home for getting their homework done 100% of the days, 100% right, 100% of the school year. So imagine if you had students that were that good at completing their homework. This one school has over 100 tutors that show up at the school site every day. And by the way, the cost to the school, $0. Here's another thing that they do. Most middle and upper class families are used to filling out forms, especially financial forms. But families from poverty are not only not very good at that, but may not have the time or the savvy that's required for all of that. And it may be very stressful. So this school has a scholarship committee for every single student in the school. You get your own committee that sits down with you and says, what do you think you might want to do when you're out of school? Kid says, I don't know, maybe this or maybe that. And they'll come back next week and say, we have a couple of universities that are strong in these subjects. And if the kid says, whoa, I think you forgot, our family doesn't have any money, they say, not a problem, we'll help you get a fully paid scholarship. And the next week they show up with, here's the classes you need to take in 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. And if the kid looks at the classes to take and goes, whoa, you've got me taking, trigonometry and calculus, and the kid's saying, me and math is like this, I'm not good at that. And they say, not a problem, we'll get you a tutor. Like, that's what equity looks like, meaning they won't let you fail. And so when it comes time to actually fill out the forms, that committee sits down with the child's caregivers, dad or mom or whomever, and they sit down with the school counselor, and they sit down with another person who works with them to make sure every single scholarship form gets filled out 100% correctly every single time and mailed in ahead of schedule to the right academic admissions person so the kids do get a scholarship. Now, when you hear about that, it sounds like a lot of hand-holding, but you wouldn't need to do that for many middle and upper-class families.
Right.
But this school does that, and every year over 95% of their kids do go on to college.
That's amazing.
Yep.
It is.
You know what it's about? It's about providing equity, but also having a high intention to do that. Most people go, whoa, it's a lot of work. Well, my question is, how badly do you want students to succeed? Is it lip service, or are you serious about it?
And why do you become a teacher in the first place?
Exactly.
Right. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the teachers, but they're not the only ones in the school system. What role do the other administrative people have? What is their job in this improvement process?
Clearly, everybody plays a role. So one thing that we can do is we can bump up not just the numbers, but the quality of parental participation. The research tells us that quality parental participation is priceless. It's worth a lot. But just having them be busybodies isn't very helpful at school. The second thing, leadership. Teachers want leaders that they can look up to, they can believe in, and they respect. So from a leadership point of view, I want leaders at the school that are willing to step up to the plate and to say, where do you guys want to go with our school? Where do you want to go with our kids? They have to have a single unifying mission that everybody can buy into. If you cannot get everybody going in the same direction, it's almost like you have a crew team and you have half of them rowing one way and the other half going in the other direction. You don't go anywhere. So leaders can help coalesce teams at the school and help coalesce discussions around what's the one thing that we all buy into. In the school that I've mentioned earlier about a school that sends 95+% of its kids off to college, every staff member says, yeah, that's what we want to do at our school. So when they have a decision to make at the school, they have to use as the criteria, does this help them get into college or not? And so every school needs that one big thing. So that's a leadership role. So you got leadership, you got parents, and you have teachers saying, okay, at our school, how do I make small, crucial tweaks in the way that I teach so that I'm more effective in my job?
What can the leaders do to change that, to change the culture of the school, to change the culture of their teachers and say, come on, let's do this for our kids?
I think part of what really good leadership is about is getting to know those that they're working with well enough to be able to know what are their buttons. Mm-hmm. And so what drives one teacher may not drive another. And an example would be some teachers at any campus are going to be driven by getting better. Like there's a great amount of internal satisfaction. We call that button mastery. Not everybody has that, and that doesn't make them a bad person. Their button might be, for example, affiliation. Like, I want to be on a team. That's an important button for some people. Another button for a teacher at school might be things like status, like I want our school to be the best one in the district. That's different than affiliation, and it's different than mastery. Part of what leadership does is the leadership knows that to this person, I'm going after that button within them, and to this, that button. And you might think, well, that's almost impossible with a staff of 50 or 100. But the truth is that you have clusters that all need to hear a certain message, and a different cluster that needs to hear another message. But all of those messages are still taking the school in the same direction. That's what amazing leadership does. I tell leaders the best way to get your school started is simply to write down what moves you, what drives you, what are your big drivers, and then the things you didn't write down, those are the gaping holes in your leadership. That's where you need to go after others.
It's kind of an all-encompassing cultural environment where the teacher, the principal or the leader of the school says, I'm going to get to know all of you and I'm going to know what makes you tick, and you're going to then pass that down to your children in your classroom. So it's a wonderful way to be, not only in schools, but in life, you know?
Every one of the schools that are successful, you walk on campus and you can feel that. What you feel is that kids want to be there. They feel like they belong. Teachers want to be there. They either like or love their job. And the leadership is doing the important things at campus. So yes, the relationships are a core piece. Everybody hears that. But what they don't know is that they're probably twice as important as what people think they are. And without building the relationships, the leader has almost no chance of success at the school.
In order to do this, you're asking them to work together over time.
So I'm going to simplify this for anyone who wants to be at a more amazing school. Now, our program breaks this down into way more detail, but here's the simple version. Number one, everybody needs a strong why. Why are we doing this? And you can find plenty of evidence for that when you start looking around into what works with leadership, and that is leadership conveys a compelling why. Teachers need to have a strong why, leaders need a strong why, and students need a strong why. So with a strong why, you've got a pretty good start. The second thing, there's got to be a really clear path. A clear path means where are we going? If we do this, then what's next? If we do that, what's next? And when we do that, what's next? And so when leaders fail to provide the why and the path, what's left? Support. So every time I talk to teachers who are at a school that's struggling, they'll always name at least one of those where there's a breakdown. They'll say, I don't know what we're doing this year. They tell us to do 20 different things. Or they'll say, I'm not sure what we're supposed to do each day. Like we don't have a clear path. Or nobody cares about what we do. There's no support for it.
This has been so fascinating so far, and we've learned so much. You mentioned in the beginning some things that we really didn't notice about children in the classroom that teachers needed to be more aware of, and one of them was chronic stress. What is the other one?
There are actually several, but I'm going to introduce just one other thing that is commonly misdiagnosed. So if a student reads something and the teacher says, tell me what you have just read. If the kid reads something and a teacher says, tell me what you just read, some students will go like this, and they don't know. And the teacher will think they weren't paying attention. Or if they ask them to do a simple math calculation in their head, like what's 4 times 5? Some kids will go like this, and they'll think kid wasn't paying attention. The bigger problem is not attention. Usually kids do pay attention. The problem is something that not one teacher in 1,000 knows, and even if they know it, they don't know how to make it better. That's working memory. It's the ability to hold something in your head and then to be able to juggle it. And working memory turns out to be a greater predictor of student success at age 5 than IQ. It's a greater predictor than reading test scores, math test scores, a greater predictor than motivation, attitude. Working memory is that powerful, but working memory is consistently weaker in students from poverty because it's impaired by chronic stress.
So thank you so much, Dr. Eric Jensen, Teaching with Poverty in Mind.